Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Olena Belyachkova, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Ukrainian Media Center. It's been 11 years of the war, and today is day 985 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor. And today we have invited you to discuss a very important topic. We will be talking about an umpteenth violation by the Russians of Geneva Convention, specifically in part of establishing the Mixed Medical Commissions, quite an important topic that will allow us to look under new angle at the violations committed by the Russians that are already documented. So, in the summer 2023, Ukraine established a mixed medical team pursuant to the Geneva Convention. We will talk in more detail about that so everybody understands what's the pluses, what are the advantages of establishing such commissions. And such commissions are comprised from two doctors from a neutral country, then representatives of the country who is keeping prisoners of war captive. And after a year of establishment of such commission on our part, Russia continues violating those rules. And to discuss it, joining us are Petro, Yatsenko, representative of the Coordination Center for the Treatment of Prisoner of War, Vsevolod Stebliuk, head of the Military Medical Department of the National Guard of Ukraine, Larysa, Salaieva, Freedom to the Defenders of Mariupol NGO, Svitlana, Solonska, Voice of the Hero Community, Olena Belyachkova, coordinator of the Group of Families of Prisoners and Missing Persons at the Media Initiative for Human Rights, and Tetiana Shelest, representative of the Office of Ukrainian Parliament Commissioner for Human Rights. Mr. Petro, so let's describe the framework so everybody understands the importance of this topic. Thank you, Olga, for introduction. Today is quite an important event. My name is Petro Yatsenko. I'm a representative of the Coordination Headquarters for the Treatment of Prisoners of War. And upon our initiative in the summer 2023, there was a mechanism established, such as Mixed Medical Commission on Ukrainian part, in order to visit the prisoners of war and to identify those prisoners of war whose conditions of health don't allow them to stay in the conditions of captivity in the specialized camps for prisoners of war. And according to the agreements signed by the aggressor in compliance with the Third Geneva Convention, the same type of commission should have been established in Russian Federation. Basically, we were working with the International Committee of Red Cross, because every medical committee should be made up of 3 members, 2 independent doctors from a neutral country, plus 1 of the representatives of the country, 1 doctor representing the country who holds prisoners of war captive. On part of Ukraine and on part of ICRC, all of the necessary work was done in order to make this commission start working. But another important part is missing. The same commission should have been established in Russian Federation, and the members of those commissions should get the full access to the places of captivity of Ukrainian prisoners of war, to be able to examine them, to identify their health condition. And as a result of activity of mixed medical commissions, the mechanism which is described in the Third Geneva Convention, the prisoners of war whose condition of health doesn't allow them to stay in the places of captivity are supposed to be either repatriated to a third country for medical treatment or repatriated to the country of their origin. I personally was visiting one of the camps where the Russian prisoners of war are being held captive, and the wounded Russians were coming up to me asking why there are no exchanges, why aren't they being brought to their homeland. And answer to this question is the fact that Russian party, after a year of establishment of a mixed medical committee on the Ukrainian part has done nothing, and this event, this press conference, is dedicated to the necessity to emphasize that we are ready to bring back those heavily wounded and severely ill. Thank you, and now I pass the floor to my colleagues. Mr. Vsevolod, the floor is yours. I would like to ask you to what extent the absence of such commissions affects the life and health of the prisoners of war. Well, first of all, I would like to say that before the military end up in captivity, they are involved in active combat operations. It's clear that during such operations they get injured, they get concussed, they stay in very unfavorable conditions that can be characterized as deeply stressful, and the fact of captivity is a huge stress itself, and it's clear that they end up in a more stressful condition than they were staying during the combat operation. The stress deteriorates all of the illnesses that did not manifest themselves in a peaceful life, given the fact that our military are people of different age. They remain without medical control. Some of them have chronic diseases. Their chronic diseases progress, and the conditions of captivity definitely do not support normal recuperation. The old injuries require medical attention, they require medical treatment. All of the illnesses that the prisoners of war may develop on the background of lowered immunity, such as skin diseases, tuberculosis, mental health disorders that are preconditioned by the stress. All of those conditions require medical attention and examination, and definitely without proper medical examination, no one can evaluate the consequences for the health. And such medical examination should be professional. Like, the doctors are not supposed to say, like, you're gonna heal by yourself, but all those conditions should be tied to the fact of staying in captivity, and the Commission should identify the necessity for transfer to the conditions where the prisoners of war can get necessary medical attention, medical aid to preserve their life and health. That's why the activities of such commissions are absolutely necessary, based on what we see, based on the fact that Ukraine complies with all of the international conventions, and unfortunately the evidence is provided by the people who get back from captivity say that the medical attention, medical aid is at very low level, and no attention is paid to the condition of those wounded and held in captivity. Well, Ms. Olena, I would like to ask you, you understand the necessities of all those held in captivity, so we would like to pay attention to your opinion. Well, we would like to draw everyone's attention to the fact of the absence of the mixed medical commission that are blocked by Russian Federation, thus violating the right of the prisoners of war for medical aid. Many of our defenders ended up in captivity having different degrees of injuries. It's the third year of captivity now in difficult conditions. The absence of normal amount of food, the absence of proper medical aid are the conditions that result in development of chronic diseases, new diseases, and on part of our state in September of 2022, the coordination headquarters officially reported the ICRC on coordination of coordinates for the positions of the independent doctors of mixed medical commissions and their deputies. In the September of the year 2023, the delegation of ICRC in Moscow officially addressed Russian Federation with the request to agree the doctors proposed by ICRC to the positions of independent doctors pursuant to the provisions of Geneva Convention. Then the coordination headquarters addressed ICRC with an open letter about absence of reaction or failure of Russian Federation to react. Russian Federation has not provided any response so far. And the question why Russia does not agree to establish such mixed medical commission is a question of our utmost concern, and this problem should be solved the soonest possible. Russia declared the readiness to take care about the interests of its citizens, about their health and life, but their actual actions demonstrate quite the opposite. Basically, they're blackmailing their own citizens, putting in danger the lives of the Ukrainian military who are being held captive as prisoners of war by Russian Federation in improper conditions. So to summarize it, Russia uses the lives of the people as an instrument of a political struggle, and the consequences of such policies of Russia are catastrophic. We were always addressing international organizations such as United Nations, ICRC, and we continue doing so in order to solve this problem, but for the time being we all know that it's still an open issue, and our delegation in October 2024 organized a travel to Istanbul for a delegation of the representatives of the families of those held captive, where we've taken part in a peaceful activity to support the families of the prisoners of war, and the families of the prisoners of war addressed the government of Turkey to support them in solution of this problem. We've sent letters to the Pope, to the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Turkey, in which letters we've described the importance of this matter, and we were asking for help in and support in establishing the mixed medical commissions. The mixed medical commissions are about the life in captivity. In captivity, the prisoners of war of both parties to the conflict. So to me, the position of Russian Federation is still unclear. That's really a blackmailing, not only... I mean, I understand that Russian Federation cannot treat our citizens adequately, but I'm talking about their citizens who are also deprived of such opportunity. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Larysa. Svitlana, the floor is yours. I would like to remind you about the act of terrorism in Olena that has taken place on the 29th of July 2022. My husband died in a truck on his way to the hospital. On the 29th of July 2024, the Office of the Procurators General served an indictment to the head of the colony. As a part of the investigation, more than 30 witnesses were questioned. The investigation identified that after the explosion, the suspects intentionally prolonged the process of evacuation, which resulted in death of the prisoners of war. The occupiers didn't allow the international organizations to examine the place of the tragedy, thus violating the Geneva Convention. And among those prisoners of war who could have survived was my husband. There were 9 of them. Some of them were sent to the Donetsk hospital, but from the videos, their relatives have seen that those prisoners of war were in difficult condition. I was talking to one of the mothers One of them just yesterday, she told me that her son was staying in Donetsk for a year, and then he was sent to Taganrog using the crutches in a very difficult condition. So in case those mixed medical commissions would have been established, such disabled prisoners of war could have been repatriated back to Ukraine, and the destiny of many people wounded or injured in this act of terrorism is still unknown. We still don't know whether they are alive or dead. Neither the families nor the coordination headquarters. Thank you very much, Tetiana. Let me ask you, we understand that in such catastrophic tragedies like these, the families of the prisoners of war try to knock on all the doors possible. So what are the steps taken by the government to make sure that such commissions start working? And it would be cool to hear from you to what extent the absence of these commissions influences the process of exchange over prisoners of war. Well, we all see what is the condition that our heroes come back from captivity in. We all see how many kilograms they lose there, and we understand how terrible are the conditions that they are being held in. So in compliance with Geneva Convention, those heavily injured and deeply sick, they require repatriation from the beginning of the conflict, and the establishment of the mixed medical commissions is an additional tool that can help us in setting Ukrainian prisoners of war free. And a representative of coordination headquarters has already mentioned that Ukrainian party has done everything. Last year we've established the mixed medical commission that was made up of 2 representatives of a neutral country and 1 representative from Ukraine, and it's been a year that we've been waiting for feedback from Russian Federation. So what's going on in reality? In fact, nothing's happening. They honestly do not want to take their people back home. They just don't need them. Back in January last year, the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Parliament of Ukraine, Dmytro Levinets, during his travel to Turkey, handed over the list with the names of heavily injured and deeply sick to his vis-a-vis in Turkey, and so far there was no result. So basically what we're talking about is that Russia doesn't care about its people. And definitely the Commissioner for Human Rights is touching upon the issue of return of the prisoners of war in all international platforms, during all meetings, wherever and whenever it is possible. It's always discussed in the international arena, but we all have to join our efforts, and Ukraine as a country and the families whose husbands, brothers, fathers are being held in captivity, and through journalists, through international community, we should continue pressing on Russia to make sure they eventually establish mixed medical commissions and bring back our heavily wounded prisoners of war back to us. So, do we know about the number of such people who are heavily injured and being held in captivity? Well, we don't have the exact number because International Committee of Red Cross are the ones who visit the prisoners of war, so we cannot talk about some specific figures, but again, we see the conditions in which they return, and we hear to their stories when they describe all of the conditions of captivity. Well, thank you, Ms. Olena, and you as an organization actively dealing with this terrible program, are you seeing any legal solutions that would help us to solve this problem eventually? Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much. That's really an important topic, and the provisions of Geneva Convention contemplate the establishment of such commissions in the very beginning of the armed conflict. All that's required is a political will. So the question about the number of such heavily injured personnel, we understand that this information we partially get it from ICRC, we partially get it from the prisoners of war who were set free, but again, the evaluation of the degree of injury is personal, is quite subjective. We understand that if people get sick with tuberculosis or there is an amputation of a limb, that's definitely a heavy injury or a serious sickness. Based on what we find out from those who were set free, both military and civilians, and based on the information that we get from the open sources, our figure is about 115 heavily wounded or seriously ill, but we understand that's definitely not an objective number in view of the condition that we observe in those prisoners of war who were exchanged. So we should use all these provisions of Geneva Convention, and there is this provision about mixed medical commissions. There is such a term set forth as a patron state. We were discussing the active involvement of Turkey in this process, and we're seeing that the exchanges that were done, they mostly happen thanks to the work, thanks to the involvement of third countries such as United Arab Emirates and Qatar. So it's not only a matter of legal nature, but also of a political nature, and the possibility to involve this third country, the third person country, which will provide Russia with opportunity to agree the establishment of such medical commissions. And we understand why Russia fails to establish such commissions, because they know that they severely violate the provisions of Geneva Convention. They do not adhere to the requirements and to the rules. They don't return the heavily injured and seriously ill. Sometimes they return the bodies of the people tortured to death, of those who died from their diseases due to the improper conditions of captivity. And to reduce that sad statistics, we have to look for those ways, to look for that patron country which will force Russia to establish such mixed medical commissions. But again, Russia understands that pursuant to the Geneva Conventions, all those further steps are will have an obliging modality, because the resolutions of the medical commissions are supposed to be adhered to, and those medical commissions, they visit and attend to the heavily injured and seriously ill at least once in half a year. At all those places of captivity they are held at. So Geneva Convention vests a number of responsibilities in Russia, but we clearly understand Russia is not going to comply with these responsibilities, and they don't even start any process to establish such mixed medical commissions. Ukraine is open, that's important. We've established such mixed medical commissions. And talking about the fact that Russia doesn't need its citizens, when Russia sees the conditions in which its prisoners are being brought back, they understand that Ukraine holds them in proper conditions and is definitely not interested in having the mixed commissions work on both sides of the conflict, and that's why it completely ignores those provisions of Geneva Convention. On our end, as a human rights organization, activity of which are aimed at protection of the interests of our defenders, civilians and their families, we are ready to advocate and resort to necessary actions, to necessary activities to make sure it yields proper result. We are ready to advocate it at the national and international levels. First of all, to make sure that those provisions start working and mixed medical commissions eventually start their operation in the both sides of the conflict. It's important for our prisoners of war because even those places that are visited by the International Committee of the Red Cross, we clearly understand they are not being shown heavily injured or seriously ill, because it's happening in a demonstrative way, and our guys who come back from captivity, they already tell us about the conditions of captivity, how difficult they are. And tuberculosis, which is widespread in the places of captivity, cannot be cured there. Those prisoners of war who contracted it, it's only their life which is maintained, and the development of this situation may result in death in captivity, which cannot be accepted, cannot be permitted. The time doesn't play in favor of those held in captivity, given the fact that they are not provided with proper meals, proper medical aid, they don't get necessary amount of vitamins, so to say. So again, we should continue pushing to advocate this topic to make sure it develops to the most extent possible. For what we understand, the international law doesn't currently have any tools to force the aggressor to undertake any steps aimed at establishment of solutions. We understand they can keep postponing it, but eventually we don't have any tools. Yes, such tools are not existent. You know, the provisions of Geneva Convention, any country which signs the Geneva Convention, they already undertake those responsibilities, but failure of Russia to comply with any provisions, well, we understand that any resolutions, let's, for example, discuss a little bit different topic, like the murder of Tigran and Nikita, the teenagers, regardless the European Parliament resolution, Russia still kills 2 Ukrainian minors. So here we should be looking for ways. Well, the enemy is formidable, but in this situation we should find a way to make Russia agree to establish those mixed medical commissions. We should suggest the conditions. Well, it should be a third country who suggests such conditions in which Russia will undertake the positive decision, because establishment of a commission would be a huge step already. Then we should develop the mechanisms to implement the provisions of Geneva Convention on mixed medical commissions that will allow them to visit the heavily wounded and seriously ill, to be properly examined, so that the decisions can be taken about the repatriation for those who require it the most. We see that the failure of Russia to admit the representatives of ICRC and their failure to act, their failure to insist to be admitted to places of captivity results in failure of their mandate to work in this area. So the work of this mixed medical commission is an alternative for the authority of ICRC, and thus those medical commissions, they may undertake, or they may force Russia to undertake decisions in favor of those who require it the most. Thank you very much. We have members of the families here. I see a lot of photos of those held in captivity, and I would like to give the floor to you for some reflections or comments. A microphone, please. My name is Lyudmila Tarasyuk. Well, we need to switch the microphone on. My name is Lyudmila Tarasyuk. I'm a wife to a prisoner of war, Serhiy Tarasyuk, born 1966. I apologize. Now, my husband is 58. 2.5 years of those 58 he spent in the captivity. According to the evidences of his brothers in arms who were exchanged on the 14th of September, my husband is currently in commission. He contracted tuberculosis and he critically lost weight until the condition when his skin is sticking to his bones. Also, he has a developing form of psoriasis and the manifestations of mental health disorders such as inadequacy due to violation of Geneva Convention, due to the terrible conditions of captivity and absence of proper medical aid and proper meals. My husband is currently in a very difficult condition. Insignificant support is provided in terms of medical aid, but necessary treatment is still absent. The disease continues ruining the health of my husband. There are already people in the colony who died of tuberculosis. I was talking to those who were set free from the captivity, who were exchanged from commission, that there are already people dying of tuberculosis. The establishment of mixed medical commission would allow my husband to be set free from the captivity based on the results of examination of such commission. Generally, the examinations by the medical commissions can help to save lives of those prisoners of war who are in difficult medical conditions. My husband was injured during the act of terrorism in Olenivka, but he was lucky to survive. However, now his life is in grave danger. After Olenivka, my husband was sent to Russian Federation. He was staying first in Taganrog, and then he was sent to commission, and based on the words from his brothers in arms, in commission, his condition of health started deteriorating drastically. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. Please. Good afternoon. My name is Yulia. My husband, Andrei Kagirsky, is a serviceman of the 56th Brigade. From the first days of the full-scale invasion, my husband was standing guard of the city of Mariupol. During difficult fights, he was severely injured in both of his legs. In April 2022, my husband was taken prisoner of war and then sentenced to 28 years by Russian Federation. Due to the absence of mixed medical commission, my husband didn't get medical attention in a timely manner and was not set free and repatriated pursuant to Geneva Convention. For the time being, due to failure to be provided necessary medical aid, based on what we know from those who were set free during the exchange, my husband is not sensing his left leg and is only sensing 70% of his right leg. If he continues in captivity without necessary medical aid and treatment, he is poised to become disabled. All of the guys held in captivity should be examined by mixed medical commissions. They should be established to preserve the lives, to save the lives and health of all of the prisoners of war. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Vladislava, and my husband, Danilo Varshavsky, is a serviceman of the National Guard, and just like all of the Mariupol garrison, he stayed in the enemy's captivity. Danilo got in captivity being heavily injured from Azovstal. He got a difficult shrapnel injury in his legs. As those set free from captivity evidence, Danilo was not provided necessary medical aid, and his condition started deteriorating more and more. I got another notice from his brother and ours, who was saying that Danila had still shrapnel in his legs and his wounds started rotting. He doesn't get proper medical attention. It's terrible that our family members should survive in captivity for a third year, experiencing all those tribulations. I can only figure what is the condition of Danila's health now. All of the prisoners of war require medical attention. Should we be confident that our family members are provided with basic medical aid, it would be easier for us morally to wait for them at home. I hope that the publicity of this topic will help our relatives, our loved ones, and the issue of establishing the Mixed Medical Commission would be eventually solved. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, do we have any more questions on the floor, please? Fakti newspaper, Dmitro Osipchuk. Did Ukrainian party address this or that country to become a patron country? Right, the patron country. Well, I think it's more of a question to the coordination headquarters. Mr. Petro, let me ask you to come back to us to rejoin our conversation. Well, we continue our contacts at all times to have a third country to become a patron country, and as we see during the exchanges, we also always extend our appreciation for the input of United Arab Emirates for their help as a third country. But here we're talking about the exchanges, but still we're open to any proposals. But again, we have to understand that such third country should be agreed by the aggressor country who holds our prisoners of war captive. So this work continues on our end, and the only blocker of this issue is the position of Russian Federation. And one more question real quick. And Ukrainian Mixed Medical Commission has not started working. Well, the Ukrainian Medical Commission, Mixed Medical Commission is already established. It's already comprising 2 representatives of a neutral country. It's supported by International Committee of Red Cross. It's fully ready to start working, and the only problem is that the ball is on the Russian side of the field. As soon as the Russian Mixed Medical Commission starts working, which would comprise 2 representatives of neutral country plus 1 representative of Russian Federation, we can immediately start the process of repatriation, in particular to a third country, to that patron country. But again, there is a little bit of different connotation. The patron country, so there is a third country which can be neutral, to which those seriously ill or heavily injured can be sent for treatment and recuperation. But again, it should be agreed between the 2 parties, Ukraine and the aggressor country. We have another question.
Sorry, Lorenzo Cremonesi from the Italian press, Corriere della Sera. Well, you touch a very, very sensible subject, very grave subject. First of all, we know that there have been exchanges of prisoners from the beginning of the war. But today you're saying that the Russians are breaching the Geneva Convention. So I would like to know, that's exactly what you say. I mean, they are breaching the Geneva Convention in spite of the fact that there are prisoner exchanges. I would like to have a clarification on this. Secondly, the only number we heard is under 15. Is it a kind of final number? Under 15 people who had been seriously injured and they're sick and they have to be exchanged urgently. Is it a number is it a total number of your prisoners that you would like to be exchanged? Thank you.
Well, I think it was not 15. Yeah, I was talking about 115. 115. 115, yes. That's the number of the people that our human rights organization is aware about. We only talk to a small fraction of civilians or military who were set free from captivity, who were exchanged, or otherwise we get this information from the open sources. We understand that after the Olena act of terrorism, those who were severely injured and are not yet exchanged, such people exist, but we're not medical specialists to evaluate the degree of their injury. It's clear that when the people who are exchanged say that there are still people staying in captivity with amputation of a limb, like leg or arm, that can be categorized as a heavy injury, like when we've discussed the development of tuberculosis, which resulted from difficult conditions of captivity. That's another case that can be categorized as seriously ill and those who require repatriation. And we also understand that not all of the prisoners of war who are being exchanged, they don't come from all of the places of captivity where our prisoners of war are held captive. There are such places from which there were no exchanges whatsoever in Russian Federation. We understand that there may be prisoners of war, more Ukrainian military or civilians, who can be severely injured or seriously ill too. For what I understand, the main question of the journalist was that one way or another the exchanges continue, and one way or another, why are we currently saying that the aggressor country is still violating the Geneva Convention? Like, for what I understand, it's not quite clear to our colleagues that systemic exchanges that continue is something that is supposed to go on, but there are more things that should be happening on top of those systemic exchanges. I mean, when we're talking about the establishment of such mixed medical commissions with no hesitations, well, we understand that according to the Geneva Conventions, the prisoners of war are exchanged all for all at the end of the conflict, and the fact that the exchanges are happening during the battle operations is good, but why we're touching upon the issue of our today's conversation, the establishment of mixed medical commissions? Because we see the horrible cases when Russia doesn't preserve the life and health of the prisoners of war as they are held in captivity. It's clear that staying in captivity for a short period may allow a person to preserve their health and life condition, but all of those who were exchanged, they provide evidences about tortures, about absence of medical aid. We don't really hear a lot of cases when the injured warriors were provided with the degree of medical aid in compliance to the Geneva Convention. So again, ignoring by Russia of the establishment of those mixed medical commission will continue resulting in the number of bodies of repatriated prisoners of war growing, and it shouldn't be the case. And we shouldn't only talk but also start acting right now. The process of repatriation of heavily injured or seriously ill is a separated process. It should be mandatory according to the provisions of Geneva Convention. Failure to comply with it by Russia may result in what the families are saying, that the captivity is not guarantee of saving the lives of the prisoners of war, is the guarantee of death. This is what Ms. Milana has mentioned in the video that we were making about her son, who was staying in captivity in difficult physical and mental health conditions. Thankfully, her son was returned, and so should be everybody, but not during the exchanges. They should be returned first in. If they don't want to bring them back to Ukraine, send them to another third country which agrees to provide them with necessary medical aid, to a country which is agreed by Russian Federation. Thank you for this comment. Dear colleagues, do we have any more questions on the floor?
Are there any figures for Ukrainian prisoners of war who have died in Russian prisons? And second question, as far as I know, there used to be some independent or semi-independent organizations who had access to Russian prisons in Russia. They were connected with the Ombudsman or with some NGOs. Do you know if there are any such commissions that still exist in Russia who have access to Ukrainian prisoners of war, included, like in general and overall, looking at conditions in Russian prisons? And are there any of them in contact with you on the Ukrainian side? Thank you.
Well, I can only comment on the information available to us about the international organizations who continue visiting the Ukrainian POWs on top of the representatives of ICRC. We understand the list that were confirmed by ICRC. They were, all those lists, they were put together without physical visiting of their Ukrainian prisoners of war. Those were the lists provided to ICRC by the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, and there is infinitesimally small number of cases when the representatives of ICRC were physically visiting the Ukrainian POW in Russia. Well, there are evidences from those who were exchanged saying that they were visited by the representatives of Russian Red Cross. Let's not confuse it with International Committee of Red Cross, because the Russian Red Cross representatives were quite aggressive and negligent in relation to Ukrainian prisoners of war. I'm not aware about any other international organizations visiting any places of captivity through Russian ombudsman. Of the places where the most of the tortures are going on. I know that the representatives of Moskalkova, the Russian ombudsman, were visiting such places. Okay, so do we know any number of those who died in captivity? Well, the figure that we're aware of is 177. It's based on the information from the families during the meeting with the representatives of Ukrainian government. It included the number of the prisoners of war who died as a result of an attack on Olenivka colony. We can again provide the exact number. As a human rights organization, we're getting this information from open sources and from the families of those killed. And as we inquire those who were exchanged, when we ask them whether they are aware of somebody who died in captivity, they sometimes only provide the fact of death, or they describe the fact of death without the verification of persons. Again, if a person dies of torture, if a prisoner of war dies of torture, we can only verify this fact after the body is repatriated. We are aware of the death of Victoria Roshina in captivity, a Ukrainian journalist, but again, her body has not been repatriated so far. When the bodies are repatriated, and we were talking to forensic specialists, and in the majority of cases, they cannot understand the cause of death. The bodies are repatriated in such condition that the specialists, the experts, cannot already identify the cause of death. Well, in case the bodies are returned in a condition where the experts still can identify the cause of death, sometimes it's torture, sometimes it's tuberculosis, For example, Alexander Holoshenko, whose body was returned, and the forensic experts identified his cause of death as torture. The Russian Federation provided a certificate that the cause of death cannot be identified due to the rotting processes in the body. But again, a person has died 3 days ago. Their body could not have been so rotten. So again, the opinion of our experts is very different from what Russian Federation has provided. Well, I would like to add a little bit on ICRC. International Committee of Red Cross are supposed to have full access to the Russian prisoners of war held captive in Ukraine. However, Russia does not allow them to attend to our prisoners of war over there. And this is probably the biggest problem, that we don't really know a lot about how our prisoners of war are being held captive and about their conditions of their captivity. We have the last question on the floor. Nikita Halka, Суспільне мовлення. My question is about such category of prisoners as civilians. We know that in compliance with the international law, they should not even be imprisoned, but unfortunately such facts exist. I would like to ask you, given this fact, can the mixed medical commissions theoretically have access to the civilians who are being held captive by Russian Federation? And what is generally the situation with bringing such people back? What is their total number held in Russian prisons? Well, talking about civilians, the Geneva Conventions only describe military prisoners of war. Generally, the fact of imprisonment by the Russians of our civilians has no legal foundation in international law, nor in international law, neither in Russian law. Those people are imprisoned illegally. Us as coordination headquarters, we work with the families of the civilians who were illegally imprisoned. We are aware of all of those cases because the Russian Federation does not provide any official information. We gather that information by pieces. Now the aggressor country has more than 150 places of imprisonment, including in the temporarily occupied territories where our prisoners of war are being held captive together with the civilian prisoners. It doesn't necessarily mean that the civilian prisoners are being held captive in all those 150 facilities, but the conditions of captivity are the same, terrible, are threatening to their life and health in the same way, and us as coordination headquarters were developing mechanisms to bring those people back. And again, failure by the Russian Federation to admit the representatives of mixed medical commissions to the places of captivity is happening because they don't want the independent members of those commissions to see our civilians who are being inhumanely treated by the Russians in their places of captivity. That's a part of a huge massive of war crimes committed by Russia. And the problem for the civilians is that there is no mechanism in the international humanitarian law to bring them back. But we have such a project as I want to get back to my place is the program under which we exchange the Ukrainian collaborationists who want to move to Russia to have them exchanged to our civilians and prisoners of war. Thank you very much for interest to this important topic. Thank you for visiting. I would like to thank the families of those held captive for sharing your stories, for being here today. Thank you for continuing your daily fight, and I would like to thank everybody who fights to bring our prisoners of war back, and I would like definitely say thank you to our security and defense forces to opportunity to hold events like this. Hopefully our heroes are coming back home shortly, and in a couple of minutes we will have another event. We will describe the crimes of Russian Federation against our journalists. Thank you for staying tuned, and let's continue working together for our victory.